Welcome to the Accidental Experts podcast. I'm your host, Bryce Hamilton. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and a child and family therapist. I have been in practice for over 15 years, and I'm also a mom of 4. So I know the challenges both professionally and personally. I'm so glad that you're here today to grow your parenting toolbox. Please come as you are and be ready to learn. My goal is to make you the accidental expert so that you can raise healthy humans. Hi guys, welcome back. I'm so glad you're with us today. So we have a special guest who's going to talk to us about ADHD and its superpowers in our kids. I know that sometimes as a parent with kids with ADHD, it can be so hard to parent these kids and they can cause us to have to grow so many skills. And so it can be frustrating for us. It can be frustrating for our kids. And so today we have Dr. Emily King, who is going to talk to us about how to help us find and help our kids find their superpowers in ADHD.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes. Okay. So we're going to be talking about how to raise kids who love their ADHD and probably helping parents to love their kids' ADHD too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I want to preface all of this by saying, if you feel like, but I don't love it, that's a very valid feling. Mm-hmm. I think what we want to accomplish with this conversation, though, is helping everyone see positives, helping everyone see some of the silver linings, and also empowering our kids to notice what they're good at, because that will have to balance some of the frustrations that do come along with ADHD.
Yeah. Well, and I mentioned to you just a second ago that like I'm raising a whole household of ADHD kids, and well, almost all. We have one to be determined. He's only 3. So we'll see how that turns out. But also my husband and I have ADHD. So it's like there are definitely pros and cons to having this diagnosis, and how we look at it matters. So tell us about like what makes you so passionate about ADHD.
Yeah. Well, I also have lots of ADHD in my family, in my immediate family, and my extended family. And then I have individuals without ADHD. So I can see the contrast. I do not have ADHD. I have lots of anxiety though. So I can very much connect with having anxiety as a young child. Sure. However, I really leaned into my actual executive functioning skills that help buffer some of that anxiety. Mm-hmm. So I really have a heart for kids that I work with who are anxious and don't have ways to solve some of the things they're anxious about. Mm-hmm. And so we can get into all of that, but just to step back for a moment, I started my career as a school psychologist, and so much of school is reliant on skills that are hard for ADHD brains, sustained attention, managing tasks, prioritizing the order you're supposed to do things in, sequencing events, following schedules, keeping track of your things. Like it just is so many skills that make school hard when you have some of these executive functioning weaknesses. And so I, saw this evolve in my practice and when working with kids in schools, and realized there's a limit to what we can do in therapy with kids. We know this with autism, with anxiety, and especially with ADHD, because this is brain wiring. This isn't like something you can therapize out of kids. What we do with ADHD to help them is we change structures around them, and we teach them strategies, and we help the people around them think about it in a different way and view their skills in a different way. And that's part of the solution. It's not all on the kid. And I would argue that that's true for all children, but especially for ADHD, because these are skills that have to be cultivated over time, and you can learn strategies and improve your executive functioning. But an awareness has to be had as you grow up, or you will start to feel really negatively about yourself. So from my perspective as a child therapist, both working in schools and working outside of schools and working with kids who, have lots of big feelings and negativity truly about the way they learn or about their quote unquote success. We can get into how we can redefine success for our kids. Those are the things that keep me passionate about talking to parents and teachers and to helping families and classrooms restructure things around our kids so that they can feel more of the things that are great about ADHD, like creativity, like fast thinking, like fast thinking and processing when they are hyper focused on something, and feeling like they are good at it, because a lot of times the systems around them do not naturally reinforce what they're good at. And that's sometimes what leads to that negative self-talk or negative self-esteem.
Yeah. Well, and I think, so this might be a good time to talk about this. I think about when I think about ADHD, and I was a kid who was born in the 80s. And when I was diagnosed, I was pretty young because my parents were pretty aware of it. And I started medication, and that was it. Like, that was all that I got in terms of skills, if we want to call that, like tools. And it is a tool, but like, nobody was like, it was just like, this is your ADHD. And that was all I got. And I was like, and every annoying thing I did, it was like, that's your ADHD. And I was like, okay, so ADHD is bad. Like, and I don't think that's what my parents wanted me to take away, but they didn't know how to describe it. So like, how can we talk to our kids about ADHD? Like, helping them to understand what it is.
Yeah, we have to start first by reframing how we think about it. So like you mentioned, in the 80s and still in the 90s and still sometimes today, we think of ADHD in a medical model. There's something quote unquote wrong. So here's a medication that will quote unquote fix it. Yeah. And that was that's the medical model. That's the straightforward way. However, brains are not linear, and we are learning more and more, probably really since the 90s, about how interconnected our emotions and our thinking are in terms of our nervous system, sense of feelings in our body and our brain and all of these things, and how completely complicated it is. And yes, medication is one tool in the toolbox. And there are children who do incredibly well taking medication. There are children who have side effects that doesn't make it worth it to take medication. Each child is different. It also depends on the complexity. Do you have other things going on and your neurodivergence that could possibly make medication a little bit trickier for your body to process? So those are all questions that have individual ramifications to discuss with your medical provider. But as a parent, start reframing your mindset from that medical model to this like dynamic developmental model, which I say dynamic because it's always changing, because your kid is not only growing and gaining skills every day, but as human nervous systems, we ebb and flow in our capacity to handle stuff, right? So if we're tired, we're going to have shorter attention spans. Everyone, that's not just ADHD. If we're hungry, we're going to have more emotional impulsivity. That's everyone, but it's amplified with ADHD. So helping our kids understand these are the things you may notice about yourself that seem a little bit more intense than your friend without ADHD or your sibling without ADHD or a grown-up with ADHD who's learned to cope with that, or just a grown-up who has a fully developed brain. So I do think it's helpful for kids to know that not only do they have some, differences in maybe the intensity they feel things and the weaknesses that they feel in certain skills compared to their peers, but we also need to remind them, because this is hopeful, that they're still growing and developing. And we know from neuroscience, we did not know this in years past, that our brains are not fully developed until we're 25. So ages 16 to drive, ages 18 to vote and do all kinds of other things are arbitrary timeframes that I talk to kids with ADHD about all the time, of like, just because you are these ages doesn't mean you're ready to do some of the things that involve pretty extensive executive functioning, like driving. And I mean, that's a whole other can of worms, right? But when we're thinking about talking to teens, especially, and talking about being a certain age or grade doesn't mean you're ready. They need to have that self-reflection of, I don't feel ready to do that. I feel like I need more practice. And that starts from when they're really young. And you don't have to necessarily call it ADHD right away if you feel like all those words are too big for your child's developmental level. You can start by planting the seeds of just what they understand their skills are in that vocabulary. So it could be things like, staying seated for a certain amount of time or needing to move their body while they're listening. What is your child doing that they need to do to either regulate to pay attention, to get enough rest, to get enough nutrition. These are things that they're probably asking for naturally. Lots of our young, active kids are what we call sensory seekers. That's the OT language for sensory. They run in the crash and they love trampolines and all that. Their body is seeking movement. And so that child is going to have a harder time sitting and attending than a child who's not a sensory seeker. And so we need to help them understand your body loves to move. And so we've got to figure out how you can get enough movement breaks and how you can ask for those movement breaks. And then, of course, we're doing lots to help the adults around them be informed. But start when they're young, talking about what's specific to your child in terms of their body needs, their rest needs, their food, hydration needs, and their play, their fun, their social play needs. All of these things are the foundations for regulation. And if we can empower them with that regulation tool, then as they grow older, they will feel more empowered to solve their own problems, because they'll be able to recognize, oh, I think I just need to sleep, or this class is just too long for me. I need to figure out how to ask to take a break, or whatever it is that the situation is calling for.
Yeah, I love that. I have a client who texted me. She left for college, back to go to college recently, and we had talked about the transition and those kind of things. And she's a kid who has ADHD, and we've worked on lots of skills. And I got a text message that was like, "Hey, I'm struggling, but here's all the skills I'm using. I know this is exactly what you tell me." And I just responded with like, you are doing such a great job. I'm so proud of you. And even though I didn't solve it, right? Like they just wanted me to know what exactly they were doing to regulate to this transition, because transitions can be hard for the average person. Change is hard, but even more with somebody who has ADHD. So I think I was like so proud of her of that moment of like, these skills matter and we're building on them. And as an adult, I still am like thinking like, I'm grumpy. Like, what do I need? Like, what am I missing? Right. And so doing that reflection and even talking to my kids sometimes, like, I'm going to take a nap today because I'm noticing that I'm kind of grouchy. Right. And so like, I think I didn't get enough rest last night. And so talking about that out loud helps our kids to know that it's okay to not be able to regulate always on your own, or like under your own willpower of like, we need things too. And that is perfectly okay and normal and healthy. And by naming it and doing it and regulating, we can celebrate that.
Exactly. And I think as someone who also grew up in the 80s, we were not taught this. We were taught to kind of suck it up and do what we were supposed to do around us. And growing up with anxiety, that to me, that looked like perfectionism and checking all the boxes. And again, leaning into my executive functioning skills, because that worked for me. However, I was pushing down lots of anxiety that I needed to, resolve later on in my life. And I think it's no accident I ended up being a child therapist.
Yes.
Like, this is fascinating.
Yes.
I think what I needed when I was a kid,
Yes.
And so when we think about the power of just modeling what we are learning almost in tandem with what our kids are learning, it gives both of us that sense of, just equality. And like, we're all just trying to figure it out. I will respect your emotional and physical needs. You respect mine. You're teaching your child to wait if you need a nap. And waiting is really hard for kids with ADHD. You're teaching your kids that you can't just soldier through and do whatever you need to do, because you won't be able, to be at full capacity. And that's healthy for them to see.
Yeah. Yeah. And pushing it down doesn't solve anything, right?
No.
It's going to be a problem that comes up later. And I do think there are times that we do have to like keep going, right? We can't just like throw our hands up and be like, I give up. Right. So it's about like, for me, thinking about that, like about talking about it, naming it, knowing what we're struggling with, and then problem solving, right? Being like, okay, this is really hard and this super sucks, but my next step, even if it's like a half step, is going to be X, whatever that is, right? To just keep moving forward, because we do need to move forward, but not with a pushing down aspect of like, we can acknowledge all of these parts and also still move forward, which I think is hard for kids in general, but especially when we have ADHD.
And kids are so concrete. I often have to teach this middle, or what we would call like a third gray area of being uncomfortable. So kids are either everything's great or everything's terrible. Like I'm too tired to do it, or I love it so much I want to do it. And then there's this middle area that we all have to learn of I'm uncomfortable. Like, let's say it's a new thing I'm trying, or this transition is hard, but it's worth it for me to do it. And of course, there's usually some sort of delayed gratification for us to accept that something's worth it. And that's hard for an impulsive brain with a short attention span. So sometimes, we have to use visuals or trust to help kids believe in that delayed gratification, or have some sort of routine that's like, we always try things one time, or you can quit after you've tried 3 times, having some of those structures built in so they can trust that my brain's going to want to not do it if I'm just uncomfortable. But I think I'll trust that I could get more comfortable if I try, and then I can decide if it's worth it.
Yeah. So that brings up something totally related, but unrelated, to what I was planning to ask you questions about. But one of the things I notice in my practice, and I feel like I have other providers too who feel this way, so I'm curious if you do too, but I think there's an element of anxiety almost always connected with ADHD. It's almost like, does the anxiety make your ADHD worse, or does your ADHD make your anxiety worse? And it may not be clinical anxiety, but it's in meaning that that's diagnosable, that, you would need tools specifically for that, although tools would be, and skills would be really helpful. But do you notice that too, of there's an element of anxiety that comes for kids with ADHD?
Yeah. And I feel like it's always different for every kid. It's hard to figure out, does the anxiety come first or does the ADHD come first? And what I mean by that, I'll use some examples. So let's say you're a kid. Because of ADHD, you always lose your belongings. So therefore, you're put in a system, being school, every day where you're supposed to show up with your belongings. And then you're getting natural feedback that you don't have what other people have because of something that is happening in your brain that you feel like you can't control. I would say then it's the ADHD happens first, and then the fallout creates anxiety, which is situational to the ADHD combined with the setting, right? Now, many parents will come at this with, well, let's just make sure you have all your belongings, and then you never have to forget your belongings. And there is a time and a place for that. We can talk about when do we save our kids, right? And bring their lunch to school because they forgot it. There's a time and a place for that. However, as kids grow and develop, they have to be able to feel that they forgot something. And then just that feeling of being uncomfortable and forgetting it will help them remember it the next day. Well, that works for non-ADHD brains, right? It doesn't necessarily work for ADHD brains because inattention is happening all the time. And so inattention is happening every day. So you could want to remember your belongings really badly and then struggle to remember them. So the opposite of that, of course, would be a child who is very anxious and clinically anxious, and then they appear distracted. They appear like they're not paying attention because they're preoccupied by all of their worries and their thoughts. And this is something that comes up when psychologists are evaluating children. Sometimes the presenting concern is it ADHD or is it anxiety? And usually it's more of the inattentive type we're looking at, if that's the mix. And that is truly something that really has to be figured out with a comprehensive evaluation of a psychologist talking across settings with parents and teachers and the child, and observing in an office, all those things, to really tease out, are there times when this child's attention is absolutely fine when they're not feeling anxious? And so that's something that can be figured out with providers if you're listening to this and trying to figure it out. But if you feel like your child has been wired from, as a parent, often it's retrospect. So my youngest has ADHD. He did not sleep through the night for an entire year. And at the time I'm like, oh, this kid won't sleep, but now I'm like, that makes complete sense to his nervous system, right? He climbed out of the crib when he was 8 months old. He walked when he was 10 months old. He just was busy. Active and busy. And so at the time you're just thinking, oh, this kid's got his own little personality. And then retrospect is so clear, right? So I think you have to think about your kid and and I see this in my clients too, is often the presenting concern is anxiety. But then if ADHD is diagnosed and we have anxiety, we've got to figure out what parts of their skill weaknesses are interacting with their environment. We may be able to make some progress on the skill weaknesses with medication and strategies, but they're going to need a lot of structure and possible changes to the environment and the schedule and things that the family has to do with routines and visuals and structure to help scaffold some of the skill weakness. And then over time, the skill weakness gets stronger as they develop, as they grow. And also what I always come back to is in neurotypical, like raising kids, we often are just trying to, we try to teach them the skill and then one day they'll be independent. And this is true for all neurodivergence, but especially for executive functioning, we can't wait for them to have the skill to be independent. We want to teach them the structure. Let's say they can completely get ready for school with a visual schedule and, they may need prompting, but there's a whole system that they use in the morning that's successful. The goal would be getting them independent on that system. That's going to happen before they possibly have the executive functioning to do it without the system.
Yeah.
And that's something I preach to teachers all the time because they so want kids just to do it like everyone else. But a kid is going to feel so much more empowered, even if they have a checklist on their desk to do it independently.
Yeah.
And they will be able to do that independently long before they'll be able to do it without the system.
Yeah. In our house, we have lists and check things. I mean, like there's just visuals, right? Like all the pictures for my 6-year-old who also has ADHD, I made I literally, cause she can't read well enough yet. So, cause we're in kindergarten. And so, I was taking pictures of all the things. I'm like, literally, this is what I want you to do. Like, it's a picture of her backpack. It's a picture of me putting her folder in her backpack, right? It's a picture of her water in her backpack, right? So just these things where it's like, I want her to succeed, but she needs the reinforcement. And I find that for myself as a parent, I am less frustrated when I'm able to say, check your list, right? Right. So I'm redirecting to the list. The list is the thing that's telling her to do it, even though I made the list and we all know I made the list, but it's helping her to go back to say yes, I did that. Yes, I brushed my teeth. Yes, I, have gotten my hair done, which she can't do independently yet, but it's those kind of things. I have my water, I have my snack, right? And so then it's not as much of a burden on me. So I am a huge believer in routine, consistency, right? And structure.
Yeah. And you saying check your list is so much simpler. And for her own ears, so few words of mom talking to me. And the more we know as parents that we talk to our kids and they're not doing something, our tone starts to get more annoyed and more annoyed.
Yes.
So we're really cutting out this potential for negative interaction during routines, whether it's in the morning or in the evening or after school. It empowers our kids. It helps them feel capable. It cuts down on the verbal language that is just I call it barking orders, right? It's not, we're not connecting with them. No. We're not playing, we want to save our interactions and our words and our attention for those moments. And oftentimes when there's tension between parent and child, it's because most of their interactions are these barking order type things. And if we can reduce that with visuals and autonomy, then we can not only help parents feel less stressed, because anyone would feel stressed if you had to tell someone 5 times every single step of the routine. This is, clearly we have both lived this. It's not at fault because you are not trying hard enough. It is just hard. Yeah. And so outsourcing that is helpful for multiple reasons.
Yeah. Well, and I don't know about you, but I've learned with my kids, each of them are so different. And so it's I might be able to give the oldest a couple directions and he has ADHD, but he's almost 13. So he can handle that because we've done lots of structure. And then the 8-year-old, I may only be able to give 1 or 2 things. If I'm doing something that's not list oriented or a task list oriented, but it's the youngest one, 1 thing, but she could still go up to her room room and find something to play with and then still come down without the thing. Right. So it's, having patience too, I think is one of those things that is hard as a parent, because like you said, we just like want to give the direction and have them do it. But I also noticed that for myself, sometimes I struggle with that. Right. So I think it's also like I can't be without ADHD because I have it. That's the way my brain is wired. But like, even when I'm like, okay, I'm going to the kitchen to get this thing. And then I get to the kitchen, I'm like, why the heck was I here? Where did I come from?
Now that
I don't remember.
Also begins to happen to people without ADHD.
Yes.
At some point
perimenopause, but yes, dang
exactly.
it. Older age. Yes, I know our cognitive function is declining, but it's hard, right? Cause I think, it's also just that compassion piece of like, I notice my kids talking to each other, how we talk to them. And sometimes it has not been super nice. And I'm like, yeah, I need to own that one. Like, we need to do this differently. Right. So like, we're going to make mistakes and that's okay. Right. But I think it's about like talking about like, hey, how is that process going? Right. Like my kids love the list because again, like you said, I'm not having to stay on them as much. And so I just say like, check your list, make sure we got everything. Right. And then I don't like to be rushed to get them to school because like that feeling feels really bad for me. And I think it helps them to feel good and confident when they're like, I did the list. And I'm like, yes, way to go. And then they're like ready. And we just like leave. And I'm like, I'm so proud of all of you. Like we did such a great job, and like celebrating all of those little things. Yep. So key.
I had a parent one time that said, you must have whiteboards all over your house. I'm like, I sure do. Whiteboards all over my house.
Yeah.
And one strategy that I'll share that this is reminding me of is what I call the Post-it strategy. And it is whenever you can draw pictures if your child's not reading yet, but writing, 1, 2, or 3 things on the Post-it and then sending your kid on their way to do it. It's almost like a test that you're not telling them it's a test, but if the Post-it never comes back, then they're not ready for, if you give them a Post-it with one thing on it and then, your daughter gets distracted in her room and never comes back down, it helps you think of, okay, so I definitely can't give 3 directions because the Post-it didn't even get back down here. And then as you try this over the years, they're skills will develop and they'll be able to all of a sudden there was one direction on the Post-it and the Post-it came back, like bring this back to me when you finish the thing. And then that they're starting to get the hang of it. It helps that it's visual. It helps that it's written down. But even for young children, they're going to get distracted and the Post-it will never make its way back to you. Once you see some progress with that strategy, that you can start building on using that as a cue to them. And if you're listening to this and you feel like, well, I only just tell them verbally and it never happens, try it visually with a Post-it. And if it still never happens, that probably means they're not developmentally ready for that level of working memory. They're having to hold that in their memory and pay attention at the same time. And that's a developmental skill that will happen over time. But you can improve it by practicing with these structures and very consistently helps. And it's hard, I know, to be consistent. I'm sure you can speak to this, but it's hard for parents who have ADHD to consistently keep structure up for kids that have ADHD.
Yes. Sometimes it falls through. Okay. So let's say that we send our kid who had the one thing on a Post-it to do something and it never comes back. They never accomplish the thing. What strategies do you have for that? Is it like monitoring them? Is it like going with them?
I would say we would scaffold that then with you're going with them to do the thing. And it could be that let's say you're going up to, you want your child to go up to their room to get socks. And so they go up to their room and you still can scaffold while you're there. Like you get up to their room and let's say you see them get distracted and start to play with Legos. So you can say, do you remember why we came up here? And so you're not just jumping in and doing it for them, or you're not saying, that they're not in trouble for not remembering. It's all about just scaffolding the next thing that they were supposed to do so that more consistently that you do that. And again, if they're in a routine of it, so let's say every morning you send them back upstairs to get socks right before you leave, that could be something that their brain then could develop a pattern. And we all know that patterns can help us remember things. And so you can pick like one thing at a time. But yes, if they are not able to do it independently, we would want to increase proximity, which is what teachers do and also what we can do as parents. this is harder when we have multiple children, but just remember, if you're old, this is why I always say, if you have, multiple children, try to get, the ones that have more skills, that may not be the oldest, but the ones that have more skills, as independent as possible, because you're always going to be tag teaming who needs scaffolding at any point.
Yes.
And that could look like a visual whiteboard. It could look like a Post-it note, but it could also look like you walking with them up there and prompting them kind of through humor and play, like, wait, why are we up here? Do you remember? And helping them connect the dots in their mind is going to help them grow versus you just telling them why they're there.
Love that. Yeah. Yeah. And so, I think this is something that none of us got a pre-parenting class on, right? Like we're doing it as we go and we're learning. And so what works for one kid may not work for the other. At least that's how it seems to be in my family. And, anyways, but it's, the scaffolding is so important of like thinking about it, setting structure to help our kids succeed. Ultimately, we do want it independently, but we've got to put all the structures in place for them to be able to do that. Like we're not going to teach them algebra before they understand numbers. So when we think about that educationally, this is just the executive functioning scaffolding that we're putting in place, which is maybe more important for life than numbers. Okay. Yeah, I said it.
I agree. You said it. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So how do we, as parents, like, as we talked about some of these things, I'm like, I can feel the frustration that maybe parents with ADHD have, and I have too at times. How do we love our kids' ADHD? Like, how can we find ourselves wrapping our mind around this, especially when like we feel, at least for me, like I have so many responsibilities to teach my kids certain things and make sure that they can go out into the world knowing how to do these tasks. So those things can be stressful. And so it can like take away from really just loving our kids in general, but especially when they have a difference in wiring.
Yeah, we have to look for where our kids find joy and where our kids thrive. And often those are similar things. So there's so much we will naturally just, notice because of the structure of schooling, the structure of all the activities we're doing, just running a household and needing to be ready and leaving, planning meals, like all these things we do as a family are all executive function. Right. And so we're going to naturally notice, we do not have to work very hard to notice the executive functioning weaknesses in our kids.
Sure.
What we have to honestly work hard with in our modern culture is allowing the space for our kids to figure out what brings them joy, what creativity they have. And let's step back and think for a minute about the strengths of an ADHD brain, which is they tend to be more creative than a non-ADHD brain. They tend to be able to hyper focus on a topic of interest and do like deep dives on it, like a laser focus versus shifting attention all the time, which is when you think about like changing classes in middle school, it blows my mind that we ask 11 and 12-year-olds to change classes with so many transitions. So, because they, none of them have great executive functioning.
Yes.
So if you could just think about your child and think about when do they thrive? When are they smiling? When are they joyful? Whatever that, if that could be music, that could be movement. What's fascinating to me is that so many of the joys of neurodivergent kids, but especially ADHD kids, because there are plenty of autistic kids that do not like nature because of the sensory demands. But there's so many kids with ADHD that love all the things that are naturally regulating to us. Nature, animals, music, movement, all of these, play. Like oftentimes kids are kind of a few years behind kind of socially and developmentally, and they want to play kind of longer into their tween years than some neurotypical kids. And all of those things we all need to regulate. And it makes complete sense to me that they just need more of it because their bodies seem to need more just input than, a non-ADHD body and brain. So when you change your mindset from how do I get my child to sit at the dinner table to maybe it would be okay if my child stood or grazed for dinner until they're a little bit older. At some point, they'll be able to sit down and eat. So it's a flexibility in timeframes of development. It's a flexibility in, does this really matter now, right? Like, yes, there are some things that really matter, but as we both know, raising neurodivergent kids, one of the first things you throw out the window is the chronological age expectations.
Yes,
you're like,
yes.
forget how old you are and what grade you're in. What are your skills right now? And what do I think you can do next? And that's what always is guiding you. And so also think about those positives of your kids' creativity and how they seek input into the world. And we have to allow time and space and opportunity for those things, because that's where you will like see your kid thrive. And that's when you will really enjoy your kid.
Yeah. Well, and that made me think about, like, oftentimes I find that parents might over program their kids, that they don't have a lot of downtime to do just, you know, maybe it's not that they're taking music lessons, but they just like to like play around on the piano, or they just like to jump on the trampoline, but it doesn't necessarily mean they need a gymnastics class or whatever it is. But I think we have a tendency to program all the moments, excuse me, which can be hard because then they don't get this ability to regulate. And then they're like, why do I have a kid that comes home from X activity and is wired? They should be exhausted. And, you know, it's like, well, I mean, yes, that activity might have been good, but like they didn't have the free time. Like every kid's kind of different. But I was just thinking about like how important that free time is and whatever your kid would choose to do that in. And like choosing to go to the park is a great thing, right? Like if that's something that is regulating to your kids, walking the trails, going to different places, going to like a shelter and petting puppies or whatever, right? It's like these different things. And sometimes I think those things seem to take more time, but I'm always like, okay, so at the end, when our kid has a meltdown or is not able to regulate to go to bed or whatever the thing is that's happening, or we're yelling at them. And so now we feel like garbage, they feel like garbage, right? Like if we do the stuff ahead of time, knowing what regulates our kids, that really helps. And it's not always avoidable, but I think oftentimes that structure and routine is important too. And that place too of like, you're going to have this outlet to go do whatever you want to, as long as it's safe at the playground. Right. So like I have a rule, you can't be on top of the monkey bars because I've seen too many kids fall. But you know, it's like anything else, right? Like, and maybe not climbing up the slides because, you know, the little kids are watching, but besides that, I might have too many limitations. Anyways. But it's like, we want our kids to succeed. And so like providing those outlets for them is also important, and talking to them about like, how did that feel for your body? Like we went to the park, you know, noticing their body signs too is part of emotional regulation, is part of our executive functioning. So like noticing how our body feels is also so important. And to say like, I really need to jump right now and let's jump. Right. Like we had a blizzard not too long ago in Kansas City, and my kids were like, I need to go outside. And I'm like, it is so freezing. But I was like, you know what? When they get too cold, they're going to come in. They have the right apparel. We've purchased the right things. They have the right jacket, right snow pants, right boots, right socks, right gloves. Go out. And they were out there for like an hour and a half. I was just so amazed, but they would like come in, warm up, go back out. And it was lovely. I mean, we had such a great time, but it's sometimes getting over those things or expectations or fears that we have as parents that may be actually creating our own problem.
Well, and sometimes it's our fears, like, is my kid going to get sick if they don't wear a jacket? I'm a big fan as a mom of boys who apparently seem to just not get cold. Just let them not wear a jacket for a day. They're going to put a jacket on if they're cold. It is just not something that I have ever picked. Well, I mean, I guess I'll probably try to pick a battle with my first, but I let it go pretty fast. And he definitely prepped me for my second, who likes to wear Crocs all the time. So, you know, I mean, it's these things that like we have preconceived notions about fears, but also this is true of all of us. And if you have a kid with any type of differences in sensory development, you probably did not want to go out in the snow. That did not sound good to you. And so it's okay for you not to want to go, but they do. And we have to believe our kids when they say, I'm not cold. We have to believe them. And if they get cold, they'll do something about it because they have nervous systems. Now, caveat here is if, you know, you have a child who is autistic, who does have differences in like reading their body temperature or which we call interoception, that's a whole sidebar issue. So talk to an occupational therapist about that. But if you think your kid has a good ability to notice when they are overheated or cold or hungry or need to go to the bathroom and they can do something about it, let them be in charge of that. Yeah. I'm only concerned about this if we feel like a child has a weakness in interoception. And so we do have to put structure and parameters around them to keep them safe. But you're so right. I mean, we have to just allow, this is autonomy, right? This is where our kids need to go feel cold and problem solve that and do something about it. That's growing their brain and their problem solving and their executive functioning. Yes. And if we step in and help too much, we don't allow them the space to have those problem solving experiences. And that's true for all of our kids, especially true for our ADHD kids, because I do think we are, as parents, we are quick to anticipate. I know I am with one of my kids who's very active. I am quick to anticipate that he is about to break something. Like his body is all over the place. Like you may break. I mean, and so it's this balance of like, I could reprimand him all the time, or I could try not to reprimand him all the time so he doesn't feel in trouble all the time. And there are going to be some natural consequences to breaking something. And then we will figure that out if it happens.
Yeah. So on that, like, I think that's a really hard place of like, we know something, we think we know, right? Because we're not always right. We may fortune tell, but be wrong. We have some history to say, yes, our kid's going to break something, or they're going to sneak something, or whatever it is. How do the natural consequences are hard for parents, right? Because like, we just want to prevent the problem. How do we allow that? Like, how do you coach parents to accepting natural consequences and its strength in parenting, especially kids with ADHD?
Yeah, there are times when a natural consequence is not worth it. So for instance, when I'm working with tweens and teens, and parents may feel like their kids are ready to be what I call med independent, like remember to take their meds on their own. The consequences are high, usually, if you forget to take your medication. And so that's an example of the natural consequence would be you forgot to take your medication. But because the cost is so high, I don't recommend that we lean into that natural consequence until we really feel like our kid is, very trustworthy, independently using timers and reminders to do that. So I want you to think about if a natural consequence is worth it. And then if you feel like it's worth it, and how I define worth it is your child going to feel kind of this just right level of uncomfortableness? They're not going to be so completely devastated that it will impact their sleep, their mood. They, start having like beyond negative self-talk, kind of self-hatred, which is, things like, well, I shouldn't even be alive. Stuff like that is more significant. And this goes back to the discussion earlier, but like when to save your kid, right? If you feel like your child will not be able to learn that day because they'll be so preoccupied with not having that item that they forgot, or they are so anxious that they're going to get in trouble because they forgot, my son forgot his clarinet. Well, not only could he not participate in band that day, but I knew that he was going to have a lot of embarrassment and shame, and the emotional toll was not worth the natural consequence. And also, it really wasn't going to help him remember it the next day because of ADHD. So I took the clarinet. So, if you though feel like your kid just needs to feel a little bit of uncomfortable, and then the next day they will be able to remember it, then natural consequences are okay. And this is where it's so hard, because it depends on our prediction of how our kid's going to feel. But it also depends on how uncomfortable we are with our kid being uncomfortable. And that's something that we all have to do the work on, because it's completely possible for our kid to be really an okay level of uncomfortable, but we are very uncomfortable. And this is when we lean too much into enabling them or solving their problems or saving the day, or never allowing them to feel like there was a mistake. And that that can if kids never, the whole other end of the spectrum, if kids never experience adversity, then they, at some point, and now I'm really talking about neurotypical kids, at some point they can feel like, oh, well, bad things don't happen to me. Mm-hmm. So we don't want that either. We need them to know that life is life and no one is immune to like stuff happening. You have to learn how to solve your problems. So that's healthy. Mm-hmm. So if you're feeling like you need to save your child that day because you were going to be buffering them from a pretty significant emotional or social consequence that will be hurtful to them or harmful to them, it would be okay to prevent that natural consequence from happening. But natural consequences are, if your child can handle that level of uncomfortable feeling, they're really the best way to learn because they're 100% related to what happened. Mm-hmm. So you don't have to keep track of any sort of reward consequence plan because it's like just you forgot the thing, so you don't have the thing. And then tomorrow you want the thing. So, but then what I will say in the context of ADHD is we can't just keep doing the same thing we're doing and hoping that our kid with ADHD just remembers it tomorrow. Okay. So we have to think, okay, is this a pattern? Has my kid been uncomfortable a few days in a row and they're still not remembering their watch or whatever the thing is? We need a plan. We need a system. They obviously are not developmentally ready to remember something. We need to scaffold that. And so natural consequences are helpful when we get to the point where we do feel like our kid has the skill, but the skill is inconsistent. And so we can lean into the natural consequences to help them solidify the skill. But if they're not anywhere close to having the skill, we wouldn't want to do the natural consequences. We would want to add in support.
Well, and I think if you don't know what's getting in the way, I mean, it's kind of like breaking it down for your kids too, and saying like, what if we tried this? Or like, would this be helpful? Because sometimes they know, sometimes they don't know.
Yeah. We have to problem solve so many of these things with them.
Yes. Collectively, right? As a collaborative kind of model, because I think they have to be on board kind of too. I mean, sometimes not, right? Like we may pick a structure that they don't love, but it is successful. But I think having their buy-in, they may have a better idea than we do. And oftentimes I feel like my ADHD kids do. They're like, what if we just did this? And I'm like, that sounds so simple, way simpler than what I was just coming up with. Like, I love
We often overthink stuff.
Yes. I know they can be so simplistic in like such a positive way of like, oh, well, why don't we just put a sticky note here? And it's like, yeah, that was okay.
Often we as parents feel like our solution has to be as complicated as how we feel about it.
That's a good explanation.
And
like
oftentimes it's like, oh yeah, that would be great. A sticky note would be great. You know,
that was so easy.
So yes, involve your kids, not only because it will improve outcomes because they feel like they're part of the process, but because they have really good ideas.
Yes.
And they know the content. I mean, not the content. They know the context of their situation truly better than we do.
Absolutely.
Because they're at school, they can explain it to us, or we can ask them to explain something that happened in the neighborhood or in someone else's house and try to suggest things, but ultimately and it's good and healthy for them to know what works for them and to try it out.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's a process, right? And again, as we said, every kid's going to be different. So what works for one of your kids may not work for the other. And you may have a 6-year-old who is neurotypical and flying through these executive functioning skills and a 12-year-old who is really struggling still. Yeah. So I think just remembering that we say don't compare kids, but like truly an unfair comparison because you're going to have one kid who feels like they're not doing enough. And that is a bummer, right? It just feels bad. It's not really a good teaching place to feel like.
And I always, suggest to really try to not talk about ages and grades when you have kids developing at different timelines in your family, especially if you have an older child with weaker executive functioning than a younger child. They notice all of this stuff. So you have we have to work actually to undo some of those cultural norms in our language of saying, well, everyone learns this when they learn it, not necessarily because they've reached a certain birthday or they are a certain grade. And that's true for teachers too. And it's easy to say, well, you're in 6th grade, so you quote unquote should be able to do this.
Mm-hmm.
Not necessarily. We have to learn the skills. Nothing magically happens when you walk into a middle school.
Yes, nothing. I mean,
there's
a lot of things. Yes,
those skills magically appear when you walk into a middle school.
That'd be amazing. Oh my gosh, that would be awesome. Yeah, but no fairy magic on that one. Okay, so I think one of the things that we were talking about, like how to love your kids ADHD too, and I was thinking like do fun things with them, like things that you mutually enjoy too. It's like instead of thinking about the ADHD piece, although excuse me, it's one piece of them. They're such a dynamic person. There's so much more to them than their ADHD, and ADHD has great, awesome, powerful, wonderful things associated with it. And sometimes we can get stuck in the, like, it's so frustrating in the morning because you can't seem to get your act together to leave this house on time. And then we feel kind of upset about that. And we might bring it all the way back home. Like we might have gone to work and then come home with that continued frustration or see something else, and it reignites that piece. And I think for me, having fun with my kids, doing things individually with my kids, like getting to know each one of them, gives me that space to just love them. And ADHD is just part of them. And so I love that too. It's hard.
Yeah, and that's where for me, that's where the creativity comes, because my kid will think up things to do that I would never think up to do. Right. And so we could, say, no, we can't do that. Squash that idea. That's not in the plan. But some of these ideas that are just like so wacky, I call one of my kids, I call the safety patrol, and one of them is the cruise director. I'm sure you can imagine which one is the ADHD kid. So, I mean, he just comes up with all these, zany ideas that are so great. And, some we can't say yes to, but some it's like, do it. You'll have so much fun.
Yes, like letting go of that adult part. And adults like to play. People would be like, I don't know. I'm like, having kids in my job is also an excuse to play. Like I literally just found a profession I can play. I mean, I do way more than play, but I do get to play.
I'm with you.
And it's like teenagers, sometimes they come into my office and they're like, are you going to make me like play with stuff? And I was like, I mean, I'm not going to make you do anything, but like we do have an opportunity to play some really fun games. Like I buy lots of things to like find the right products. And like, if you can trust me and try them out, there'll be like, hey, can we play the game again? Like, it's so fun because they like to play too. Nobody stops liking to play. It's just that we feel like it's a social expectation that we stop playing. So remembering that it is still fun to play and like, it's way more fun to be less serious. And I don't know. I think about like how I want my kids to remember me too, of like a playful mom for me feels good. And like, sometimes I have to, say, okay, we're done. Time to like wrap up. It's bedtime. It's dinner time, right? Set expectations and boundaries and those kind of things. I do that all the time, but I also like to play and just have fun and be silly. And like we introduced flashlight tag to our kids recently and it is hysterical. It is so funny to turn off all of the lights in the house and like just have fun. Right. Like, and so I don't know. I think we sometimes forget how great it is to play.
Yeah, I completely agree. And play, like you said, doesn't have to be games. It can also be being silly, having dance parties, listening to music, anything that involves like I was saying, like animals and nature and rhythm and movement and all of that is regulating to our nervous system. And that is all play. Yes. And we forget that as adults because we are, honestly, kind of indoctrinated with this, mindset of school, then work, then doing all the things. And part of it is rest that we need, but play is also rest I always say play is the work of kids, but play is rest for adults.
I love that. That's awesome. Okay. So how do we get our kids to love their ADHD? Because this part can be hard because as you mentioned, like they're noticing the differences that other kids, maybe who are neurotypical or in their class or their siblings or the neighborhood kids who are able to do things differently or faster or whatever the dynamic is, or don't need as much support, whatever they see, are able to emotionally regulate, have more cognitive flexibility. So like, don't get upset when things don't go the way they want to. I mean, there's so many ways that they're observing the world and seeing how there are things that are different. And so I think they can become hard on themselves. What can we do in those moments?
Yeah, this is so hard because they are living in systems where they're, getting feedback on all the things that are hard for them. And as parents, and hopefully sometimes as teachers, because teachers will also notice strengths in kids. And so if a teacher mentions like, oh, I noticed they really like this, like that is totally a thing. We can nurture that. Any type of little nugget that brings your kid joy, we want to nurture that and see if we can find some sort of opportunity for them to do that more. And we'll have to work for it. If maybe it has something to do with music or it could be sports, or it could be something completely, outside the box that we wouldn't have predicted. But we can ask them, would you like for this to be a part of your week? Because in the end, it's got to balance out the frustration. If we think of like, the net gain and net loss of like emotion within a week, that's healthy for everyone to have this balance of frustration, tolerance with frustration. And kids with ADHD have lots of that. And we need to think about trying to balance that with the time and also the joy they feel with things that they like. And we usually have to work hard to create those opportunities for our kids. So it could be, adding, and it doesn't have to be like extra activities that you pay for. It can just be, knowing that your kid really loves unstructured playtime and that you have a routine on the weekends or even after school of doing those things. And they always get that playtime outside for their body. It could be that you're going on hikes. It could be that you're doing music together, whatever it is that brings them joy and you can have some connection with it. That will send the message to your kid that you're balancing out, things that like my body needs this. And because my body likes to move and it's harder to pay attention when I'm in the four walls of a classroom, but I also get to spend this time outside and with things I love. And we have to give our kids those opportunities so that it's not so much, I feel like, about, loving. I mean, we want kids to, love their creativity and love and appreciate maybe their high energy. But what we really want them to love is just themselves, right? And so the ADHD is a part of them, but also there are all these other, like you said, there are all these other parts of them that may have nothing to do with ADHD. And we need to, lean into all of that so that they love all these other parts of themselves too. And that, yes, there will be parts of they will notice probably over time, either a hyper focus or a creativity that their, non-ADHD peers don't have. They're like, they like deep dove into something and totally didn't realize everyone in the room was doing something else, but they figured this thing out because they were totally into it. And, there may be something like that. You can help them remember your ADHD lets you, hyper focus on this. This is something that Penn Holderness talks a lot about. I don't know if you follow him, and his book ADHD is awesome. He talks about music is like this for him. And one example he gave is how he sometimes is in like a meeting where they're workshopping ideas for videos, and he has a song in his mind and he has to walk out of the meeting and write it down, or like, I don't know how he keeps track of all his stuff, but he can't focus on both. And he's like going to lose it in terms of like not being able to remember it, not emotionally lose it, but not be able to remember it if he doesn't put it down. So like, being able to say like, no one else in this meeting has a song in their head that they're crafting right now in the middle of this conversation. So I know that that's special to me and I've got to go write that down. Then I can pay attention. So it's noticing those things and how to adapt to your environment that you're in can hopefully lead to your kid loving them, their whole self, and their ADHD is just a part of that.
Yeah. And it can be frustrating. I mean, kids can get frustrated about it, and that's totally fine. Just like parents can be frustrated about that. But I think staying in the frustration is probably not the most valuable space. It's like, how do we work with this? Like, this is true and this is true, right? Like figuring out how to have both things be true at the same time. Like, I have ADHD and I can use this skill to, you know, help me remember my backpack or my lunch or whatever, or, you know, to handle something changing, right? Like whatever it is that kind of gets in their way, because what we're learning in ADHD, which I love, is that instead of it being this set of skill, like specific things that we're struggling with, it's a really broad area of executive functioning, and that there is a deficit in several of those areas or all of those areas that is more personal and helps us to catch these kids so that we can skill them better. I like that our profession is moving in that direction, because
me too.
It's been hard. I'm like, I know this kid has ADHD, and it's like the Vanderbilt or the assessment that we do does not indicate enough. And it's like, these are the wrong things that they're looking at. Like these things are not what this particular kid is struggling with. So I think this would be something I would say to parents. If you feel like your kid has ADHD and it's being missed, right? Like you just have this feeling, trust your gut. I believe in parent gut more than probably any other thing. Keep advocating for your kid. It may not be ADHD. It might be something else that we're missing, but I think that's an important part. Okay. So let's end on teachers in school loving ADHD. This can be such a hard one because, you know, the kids with ADHD may need to move and be out of their seat and maybe off task. How do we help them?
Yeah. So I think it's helpful too, to think about your child's fit with the teacher. You know, I don't think we have any data on this, but just anecdotally, I have noticed that like very structured teachers do well with ADHD brains. And then ADHD, or very like what we might call a free spirited or not very organized teacher, doesn't really do well with an ADHD student, because there are like no one's keeping the other one kind of held accountable, and the structure around it. So, you know, that's something to think about when you're talking to administrators about teacher fit. You know, administrators want your child to be successful. They want their teachers to be successful. And there's some kids, though, that are the opposite of what I just said, that they maybe need a similar teacher. And it's okay that they both have ADHD or they're both disorganized, because your child just may be really feeling accepted in that classroom. So it could go either way, but think about the teacher-child fit as well when you're advocating for, of course, most schools, they don't let you choose your teacher, but you can say, these are the characteristics of a teacher that will work well for my child's learning style. And then be really upfront when you're communicating with your teacher, because you can say, whatever you've figured out so far that works, it might be something last year's teacher figured out. It might be something that you have figured out in your routines at home. And you can say, I don't know what this would look like in the classroom, but this is what it looks like at dinner or at, you know, getting ready to go out the door. These are the strategies that have worked. And so it might work for snack time or lunch or transitioning out to recess. So let the teacher kind of decide how that's going to look in their classroom. But you have so many ideas already, and it might be what's working. It might also be what's not working. So you may say to teachers, you know, we haven't been able to figure out how to, you know, keep my kid at the dinner table to eat, you know, and I always encourage parents, let teachers know what your child is not doing at home, because if they do it at school, then teachers know it's a big deal. So for instance, if you're a teacher listening, you may not think it's a big deal that a child is sitting through 15 minutes of snack time. But if that child is not able to sit through 15 minutes of dinner, that parent wants to know that, because that is a milestone that that kid is doing that anywhere in any settings, you know? So communicate with parents about what are they able to do at home, what are they not able to do at home, so that you each know if the child makes progress in one of the other settings, it's a win, and not. And, you know, you're continuing to move towards, of course, them being able to do it in both settings. But if they do it in just one setting, that means that skill is emerging. In terms of like academic strategies for teachers, I just always encourage teachers to know that it is completely possible for kids to be advanced at certain academic things and not be able to keep up with any of their belongings. So there can be this asynchronous development in academic skills and executive functioning skills. We see this with gifted ADHD kids or twice exceptional kids. We see this with gifted, sometimes with kids with learning disabilities and gifted, intellectual giftedness. But the executive functionings have nothing to do with intelligence. And so we have to remember that those are two completely separate skills in the brain. And it's great when a child is intelligent because we usually can lean into their problem solving skills and their memory skills to be able to teach some of the systems for executive functioning. But it is very possible to be able to do advanced math and not be able to remember your pencil. Like, totally a thing, So just remember, I always say to teachers, just remember that asynchronous profile is kind of the cornerstone of neurodivergence, right? Yes. And so the standard curriculums and how we group kids and how we teach things in a linear way, I'm a huge proponent of we have to do it somehow, right? Like we're not teaching everyone individually. We are teaching kids in groups. So we do have to structure curriculums in a linear way. We do have to group kids, generally by age, but within that, it has to be a dynamic presentation of, could this kid do it while standing? Could this kid do it on a certain topic? Could this kid have, flexible timelines for turning things in? Because when they forget, they go into an anxiety spiral and then nothing gets done. Like there are different ways to, as we all know, through 504s and IEPs to have accommodations, but it also is something you could just bake into your classroom of having different topics, different, flexible timeframes on things. And also just, different ways of kids moving their bodies to stay regulated and feeling safe so that they are ready to learn.
Yeah. Thank you so much for today. This has been awesome. You have been such a great guest. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks again, Emily. That was such a great conversation. I so appreciate your time, and I appreciate your time. I hope that this conversation was helpful for you. If you liked what we did today, can you rate and subscribe to our show? Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. And also keep the emails coming to us with future topic suggestions. We are absolutely loving all the topic suggestions that you guys are giving us to accidentalexperts@gmail.com. Have a fantastic day. Some words from our legal team.
The information presented in this podcast is not intended or implied to be a substitute for appropriate professional advice, diagnosis, or treatment. All content, including text, graphics, images, and information contained on or available through this podcast, is for general information purposes only. This podcast makes no representations and assumes no responsibility for the accuracy or information on or available through this podcast, and such information is subject to change without notice. You are encouraged to confirm any information obtained through this program with other sources and review all information regarding any condition or treatment with the appropriate professionals.
What we're saying is, yes, I am a real therapist, but I'm not your therapist.